Hello, welcome everybody for another episode of Shred Your Halo. And the joyful topic today is going to be all about grief. And this time of COVID-19, lockdown and quarantining, a lot of us, this particular topic is extremely close to home. So, and this week, Jharna has chosen the topic, so I'm going to pass it on to her and ask her why she chose it and how we're going to go about delving into the topic of grief.
It was just something that came to me during one of my meditations. I suddenly experienced something. I mean, it seemed familiar because I have experienced grief before, but it was something that I didn't realize I needed to address right away, because grief is something that doesn't feel very healthy when you put off. So I just felt that this was a topic we could talk about. And also I feel that, like you mentioned, because of COVID, there are a lot of people experiencing grief probably, and now you don't really have a choice except to face it, because there's nowhere else to divert your attention to, take you away from what you're feeling.
That's true. Yeah.
So I decided that it was quite an interesting topic to talk about, considering how we all grieve in some manner, but do we actually really grieve? It looks like grief on the outside, we cry and we feel upset, but are we actually experiencing whatever we're going through? So that's the reason why I thought of this topic. And we'll start with the first question. What is grief for you?
Oh, right. For me, grief represents your reaction to a finality. So it's an intense sorrow, usually, over the ultimate finality of something. It's usually death. And it need not necessarily mean death of a person. Of course, it could be. It could be death of a circumstance, death of a kind of reality that we've gotten used to, death of an era, death of a particular circumstance. Sometimes grief can even be over something at the end of a beautiful phase, like there are lots of women. Of course, this is just one limb of the octopus, that is the postpartum depression, but there are women who, after 9 months of gestation, after they've given birth to a baby, feel this incredible sense of grief, because something that was part of their body has now been separated from them, and now they have to learn a completely new reality. So, of course, this is just one tiny aspect of it. So everything that comes to a final end, a death, a finite death of something, and the emotion that it generates is what I think grief is. What about you?
For me, it's about separation. And again, of course, when we talk about separation, it could be again like death, or it could be something that you really wanted but you're not able to have. And sometimes it's about not having things answered. You're looking for an answer and you're not getting that answer. It's also a lot of restlessness, I feel, and that feeling of being in limbo can be a little trying. So sometimes I notice that I grieve even those periods of not knowing. So separation, and also grief is something that I feel when there is a sort of a fear under that grief. And because I'm scared, that's also something I'm grieving, but I don't know how, right? So for me, it's mostly to do with separation from who I am as a person, not being able to understand who I am, and also being separated from people that I love. So I suppose it is a kind of a finality in itself. So but for me, it's...
Sorry to disrupt, but what is the difference between sorrow and grief?
I think
intense sadness and grief.
I think grief, because it's final, right? There's literally nothing else to happen beyond that. If you're feeling sad about something, you can still sort of stay in that space for a little while. Yeah. But if you have to accept that you're grieving, you have to
grieve yourself that done. It's
it's basically closure, and sometimes it could mean that there is going to be no closure.
Yeah, it's done.
So yeah, I suppose, I mean, in my way of understanding what grief has been, I think it's a lot to do with separation in my case.
Yes.
So
Separation from what you've known and you stepping into something that is a bit unknown. Yeah.
and it can also be things that were not healthy for you, but then suddenly you come into something healthy, and then you have to grieve what was unhealthy as well because of the familiarity of the situation. So yeah, so I suppose grief feels like that for me. And we'll go into the next question. It's almost like sort of flowing. What is the purpose of grief for you?
Before I answer the question, I apologize for the fan. We're filming this in the afternoon, and this is Chennai, and this is May, the middle of May, and it is so hot, and I live in the second floor, and it's very hot, even though the air conditioning is on. So I apologize for looking like an old lady.
All you need is that teacup.
I know, and mahjong tiles. Oh dear God! All right. The question was,
What is the purpose of grief?
I think the purpose of grief is, if left to nature, the beautiful purpose of grief is, like you said, closure. It's a wonderful way of saying you meant so much. And most of the time, humans have a tendency to not realize the value of something till it's gone, right? So it's a wonderful way for us to learn from the depth of our grief, that what we are stepping away from was so incredibly precious to us, and keep our eyes open for something similar for us in our future. So when we grieve something intensely, and when we don't present any resistance or philosophies against grief, but grief in its purest natural form is a rite of passage. When one door closes and you step into another room, it's just a rite of passage. Another dark side, this is the light side of the coin. The dark side of the coin of grief is when people hold on to that grief in order to give themselves. I don't think many people think of it consciously like this, but many people hold on to certain tragedies because it gives them a multi-dimensional character, it gives them story, it gives them depth in the narration. They incorporate this into the narration of their life. And I know that I've done this many, many times. And when I allowed myself to grieve, if you grieve properly, the natural way to grieve, the commonsensical next stage is letting go. There would be a release, which may not feel pleasant. Most natural things seldom feel pleasant. But then you step into the next phase in your life. Doesn't mean you won't feel pangs of sorrow now and then, because the closure process is a process. It's not like a one-time event. So, but on the other hand, you see the dark side of grief, where people either hold on to grief in order to subconsciously add a layer or a depth to their character, or there is another a dark aspect to grief where they hold on because they don't know how to face forward in life. They can only face backwards. Nostalgia, this is toxic nostalgia. What my parents know is all I want to know. All I've known is all I want to know. I don't want to know anything new, anything different, anything possible. I don't want to know. So it's almost going against nature. So it's a kind of a malignant nostalgia causes people to hold on and not grieve through it. And also people who want to keep it as part of their life's narration.
I also feel sometimes I think people may hold on to grief as a form of revenge, probably.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, you did something bad, and I'm going to hold on to it forever.
Yeah.
And that will fuel another personality that I can.
Yes,
show
yes,
people.
yeah.
Yeah, for me also, the purpose of grief is closure and healing, because if there is no closure, it's like an open wound, right? And also, I don't want to be physically sick, so I think it's very important to grieve, because it can store in your body in places you don't think will be possible. You could suddenly show up with an illness which makes no sense at all. And it's basically, I'm copying her answer like every time.
This is the problem with letting somebody go first.
But yes, grief is it's just a natural, healthy way to live, so you can get closure from things that may or may not in real life have an end. But it's for you. It's not about closure on the outside, it's about closure on the inside, right? So a lot of things need to be grieved simply because that is the only way to move forward on a blank slate, or whatever lessons you've learned in that period of grieving, and you move forward from that place. So closure, yes. Now I feel like I'm just copying whatever answer is.
Okay, the next question you answer first, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Right.
So the next question is, what are the barriers to grief? Okay, I will go first.
Yes.
So barriers to grief, I think the first biggest barrier is people telling you, don't be sad, because that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You know, don't feel sad, forget about it, it's no big deal. And when a society at large is telling you not to feel a certain way, sometimes you feel obligated to go with that and try to get on with your life without grieving. And it's very, very unhealthy, because it perpetuates that kind of attitude in an entire society that could possibly be a very unhealthy, sick kind of a dynamic. So that's one of the biggest barriers to grieve. Sorry.
Yes. Calling John Grisham. Okay.
Another barrier is anger, disappointment, bitterness, resentment. These are emotions that we feel, which make us feel a bit powerful in that situation, because when you accept that you're grieving, you also have to go through a phase of being completely powerless to whatever you're feeling. But when you are angry and when you are holding on to something, it gives you a sense of power. It gives you a sense of, okay, I've not totally lost my life. I can still do something with it. I can channel this forward moving energy. That is what we think. But grief is like, it's like a black hole, right? It just sucks everything out of you and leaves you in a place where you have no choice but to accept whatever it is you're experiencing. So I think these two are big barriers to grief. And I think perpetuating this kind of an attitude is not really healthy as such for a society. So
Grief shaming, basically.
Yeah.
It comes down to it, isn't it?
oh, you're such a baby, don't cry, don't be sad. I mean, and this especially happens with children, because they don't really have the words to express how they're feeling. So if they're sad, they're sad. And then I remember there was this one time I heard a father yelling at his son saying, have you no shame? He was crying. This boy was crying for something, and the father says, have you no shame? You're such a big boy and you are crying. I mean, what's wrong with you? And he was screaming at this kid. And I wasn't there when in front of them when he was yelling. I heard it because this was one of my old neighbors, and it felt really bad. I mean, why would you not give another person permission? I suppose you wouldn't give another person permission to grieve if you haven't grieved yourself. Also, I think In terms of gender, I've noticed men don't have the permission to grieve as much as women do,
Yes.
because men are expected to be strong. And if a woman is crying, they say, oh, it's okay, she's a woman, she can cry. And that's very sexist. So that's another thing I think men have to deal with, and it's quite hard on them. I suppose it would be hard on them. So I think these are the few things I feel are barriers to
I
grief.
mean, it has to be hard, because if it is a natural process, grief is natural, and being a man means you're not supposed to do something natural, then being a man is unnatural. You know, that is toxic masculinity. So, yeah. My answer to this question, what are the barriers to grief? Number one is ignorance. Grief, just because you grieve now doesn't mean you're going to grieve forever. I think most of us are out of touch with what time is. We know deadlines, as in we know what the deadline is for our start of our workday. We know what the deadline is for our workday to end. We know what the deadline is for paying our bills. So we know what deadlines are, and those are externally applied to us. But we don't know what the natural process, like each person, as a doctor, I know that each person's time for wound healing is different, right? It's different at different ages. It's different for different ethnicities even, you know? So, and it's different for different times of the season. Like it's different during summer, it's different during monsoon. So, sorry, those were all my dogs. We were just shaking it off. Right, so for us, and also we cannot predict how much we're going to grieve and how long we're going to grieve. And I think in our ignorance, to get back to what resembles normal, because if we act normal and we behave normal and we talk normal and we get back to our normal schedules, oh, then we're okay, you know? That sense of ignorance into investing more into appearance, into the facade of things, rather than authentically living flesh and blood, you know, gloriously undignified. I think ignorance is one of the major, the ignorance about grief, right, is a major stumbling block towards actual grieving. The second one is survival instinct. Most of the time, our survival instinct will kick in when we know we have healthy survival instincts, right? We wouldn't have survived into adulthood if we didn't have one that is functional and working. So our ignorance of our own survival instinct is what makes us assume that our grief will overwhelm us and kill us. So, and also because we are kind of shielding our younger generation from all pain. Like there is no competition anymore. There's no first place anymore. There's no like, oh, everybody's feelings will get hurt. You participated, that's enough, you know? So we're kind of cushioning
what is natural.
Yeah, you know, the survival of the fittest. And of course our brain, our infantile brain sometimes, whilst it's growing, will tell us that all pain is danger. That's how it tells us. And the education of how far we can push ourselves, how much pain we can bear in which areas of our life is what defines us as fully rounded human beings when we grow into adults. When we do not give the possibility of education from pain, when we grow into adults, we will be uneducated adults who just do not have any idea of what survival instincts we possess to process grief in a healthy way and know that, you know what, let him grieve, I'm there for him, I'll keep the household alive, let this person grieve. In our heads, we assume if you're not up in 48 hours running the business like you're supposed to, it's uncomfortable for me, and therefore you need to snap out of it.
That movie which you told me about, Prisoners.
Oh, Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal, and this is people who have never processed their own grief, who turn into serial murderers. I'm not saying that we'll turn into serial murderers.
How is this happening on every video that we talk about?
I know. If you don't process grief, you're going to turn into a serial murderer. That's a call to arms. Feel grief. Now, the next point, another barrier to grief is our complete lack of our dissociation from nature. We've forgotten what it is like to understand seasons. There's a sowing season and there's a harvest season, right? So there is a season of plenty, there's a season of less, there's a season for what is it, giving, there's a season for receiving. So likewise, there's a season for joy and there is a season for sorrow. And unfortunately, if we don't know our biorhythms personally, we are going to assume that there is something wrong with us and we need to medicate ourselves against what comes naturally and seasonally in a way nature has intended for us to be done with the things of the past and hello, a new version of you. It's a kind of molting. And if what we are saying goodbye to is a pleasurable circumstance in our life, for let's say I was in this absolutely perfect job setting, right? And then now I get a promotion, which means more responsibilities, but lesser time with my peer groups. And that would cause me to maybe, if I don't know how to grieve this amazing time that I have, but now it's time to move on. Humans, especially in this time and age where we have not learned to adapt, but we have chosen to turn the environment to adapt to us, we are breaking easier than we are bending to circumstance. So therefore we don't know how to grieve. That's another huge barrier to grieving, I think. So these are the 3 points. The first one was the sheer ignorance of the nature of grief and what the process, the length of grief, the very nature of grief. We don't know what it is because we're cushioning everybody from grief. The second one is the pain of grief is interpreted by our infantile brain as danger. So, and when we cushion children so much from testing their boundaries, they grow up into adults who probably, like the dad, kills the sorrow in that child, instead of telling him, that's a feeling too, And the third one is seasons. Some seasons, sometimes some relationships will end for literally no reason. Sometimes our parents will die, our pets will die, a calamity like this has never been foreseen, but this happened. So things will happen, and because we've forgotten what it is to learn to bend and be malleable, and the world teaches us to be strong and rigid, we break. So that's another barrier to grief. I feel
being vulnerable is not looked at as a strength, right? It's supposed to be a sign of weakness and not being enoughness.
But then again, being vulnerable, don't be vulnerable to the man you bump into in the grocery store. Be vulnerable to people you love and you have in your life. Yes.
All right. So the last question that I have is, what is a healthy way to grieve? How do we grieve in a healthy manner and not spiral?
Answer first so that it doesn't come across like I am stealing your answers.
I think this we've mentioned so many times. First thing is, of course, talk to people that you trust, your close circle of people, whatever you're going through. It's important to have somebody that you can speak with. Second, find a therapist, because they are trained to channel whatever you're going through in a way that probably you don't understand, but they're able to see it from their perspective. And sometimes you just need to give yourself time. It's not something that it could happen overnight, it could take years, it could take much longer than that. So giving yourself time, giving yourself space, and also many times grief is associated with shame. So addressing the shame is also extremely important, because shame doesn't allow you to feel.
Be a man.
Be a man.
Yeah.
Don't be, and I don't understand this insult. Don't be such a girl. I mean, what is that?
Yeah. Don't be such a kitty cat. Yeah. You should have a kitty cat. You'll know what really being tough then means.
So shame, I think it's one of the things that clouds your judgment. It puts you in that state of, I need to survive, and that is all that matters at this point of time. So it also separates you from people that you are close to, so you don't feel like you can trust anyone enough to talk about these things with. Second thing, no, not the second thing. Third thing is when you feel angry or when you feel resentment, look at those emotions as well, because they're usually a cover emotion for something that's much deeper, which prevents you from looking in further. You think, okay, I'm angry, I'm going to use up all my anger and make things happen around me so I don't have to feel grief, like I mentioned at the beginning, barriers to grief. So usually anger is a cover emotion for sadness,
fear.
Fear, being lost. And I mean, these are part of what I have experienced. It could be different for different people. But these are things, if you start addressing the surface, it'll slowly help you go a little bit deeper. And sometimes you just have to decide that you need to do it for yourself, simply because that's the only way to live a peaceful life. You don't have to keep holding it, to your heart and keep saying that, I mean, your heart has been through enough. Grief is just going to compound that if it's not addressed. So please talk to somebody, see a therapist. Few other things that you can do. I mean, I think I mentioned this in the previous, one of the previous videos as well. Doing the Work by Byron Katie.
I think a few videos.
I think I mentioned it at least in the last 3 videos.
Yeah.
It helps you challenge your beliefs as well. Read books that you think might help you, that could be specifically addressing grief as well. I think Teal Swan has written a number of books on those topics. Doing paths work, that's something you can look into as well. So there are many different modalities that you can choose to heal from grief, or at least let yourself grieve in a healthy manner. And addressing shame is, personally, I feel that's like the biggest thing that could stop you from not experiencing your grief. So please address that as well. So for me, I feel these are the things that you could be doing.
Sometimes I think before I answer the question that you asked, it's like how to process grief in a healthy way, right? To the caveat to the last point is, if there are people who are going to shame you for feeling grief, grieve alone.
Yeah.
It's better. Anyway, grieving is a personal and an extremely isolating experience anyway. And I think personally for me, grieving alone gets me through it with less pain, because I don't have to process another person trying to comfort me, because I find I have to snap out of it now. I feel the sense of obligation. Grieving alone is not bad. Doesn't mean you're a loser. I have consistently grieved alone in my life, and I'm okay, and you'll be fine too. So if other people's comforting tactics and cheering you up modalities.
Oh, that's annoying, right?
You do not need the added pressure of putting on a face in order to make the person who's trying to get you up feel like they won the situation. You don't owe anybody anything. And if that requires of you to embrace the shame of going through the grief all alone like a loser, do it. Do it. it is what it is. We just have to go through what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. To answer the question, how to go through grief in a healthy way. Now, the model for understanding grief was developed by this doctor called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1969 in her book On Death and Dying. Right? That's where she distinguished grief from sorrow, pain, unhappiness, loss. Grief encompasses all of that and surpasses all of that in its intensity, right? Because it requires of us to deal with a goodbye and never seeing something again. Now, the first stage of grief is denial, because we cannot believe that something is over. So again, do not resist the denial. Do not resist it. Deny it. We will deny something has come to an end, something so big. Like when my father passed away, I continued to see him as this giant of a person, right? Or because I continued to see him through my adulthood as from the worm's eye view. He was always this giant. And seeing him in that casket, in his actual size, was a huge, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, he's normal sized human, he's not a giant. That was, oh my God, you know. And for the longest time, I had to deny because we cannot have a crippling grief reaction during the funeral, during the time when I needed to be present for certain things. So,
and also I think your body sometimes freezes in that
yes,
moment, right? Doesn't allow you to process it right
absolutely.
then and there.
Absolutely. Imagine having a moment of grief and you're a pilot and you're flying 40,000 feet above somewhere. You know, so our body, whatever is coming from our body is good. It's not dangerous. It might feel painful, but it is not dangerous. The things we put into our body, like the information we put, the company we keep, the food we consume, the information that we gather can be toxic, right? But what comes out of our body, that's why I keep on telling my patients, alcohol feels good, but ultimately that will kill you. But withdrawal feels like death, but that's what will keep you alive because you have to go through it. So nothing that comes out of us is ever going to be dangerous to us, including our own shadows and our fears. So when you watch the denial of, watch yourself denying the reality of something ending, it is one of the stages of grief, and we need to watch for that and allow it to go on for as long as it does. And depending upon the circumstances, situation, how woke each of us is, it might last from a few minutes to a few days to a few hours to a few months or years. We could be in that stage. Just do not resist it. The second stage is anger. How dare it end? How dare it finish? I wasn't done with this. Well, unfortunately, most of us are not done with something before. Like, then the whole concept of closure needn't be there, right? So, and life is never a neatly tied little package with a bow on top that you open with tassels and glitter streaming. It is not like that.
Life is exhausting if life is just that.
Life is fucking undignified and messy as heck. So be prepared for anger, and anger is going to look so ugly.
Yeah.
Own it. That's one of the stages of grief. The second one is bargaining. Third is bargaining, where you're going to be like, okay, God, I'm going to do this. Please give that back to me. But you're going to be like, God, like, well, you just passed 4th standard. You have to get to 5th standard now. You can't pass your exams and remain in the 4th standard. That's just not how it is. So, yeah, we have to, there is the sense of bargaining. Go through it. The next stage is depression. One of the beauties of depression, one of the hallmarks, the beautiful hallmarks of depression is hopelessness. When it comes as a symptom of grief, it gives you a sense of you can't hope for that anymore. So there's no point in focusing on something that is hopeless. Depression that arises as a healthy response to something ending has to be embraced, because your DNA has to change to accommodate, your muscle memory has to learn to accommodate a new reality now, a reality that is devoid of that which just passed away. So embrace that depression. Easier said than done. And like Jharna said, if you need help for embracing something, doesn't mean just killing yourself going through it. If there is medical help, if there is therapy, if there's counseling, if there is cognitive behavioral therapy, embrace it, go for it. If you have friends who will sit and just breathe with you through the process, reach out. And occasionally, if you need islands of interval between feeling whatever you're feeling, grab at those and go for a movie, take some time off, and then come back to your reality. Don't try and escape your reality altogether. Depression is going to be quite difficult, but when you accept that depression and the hopelessness, which is the hallmark and the foundation of depression, you're going to learn to accept. And with acceptance comes the release. Then we will never walk into our future back first, because our entire focus is on something that has passed away, right? You won't be a person who's walking into a new relationship thinking about your ex. You're not going to be a person who's won these great accolades in Olympics, and forever that is only you're never going to enjoy anything more in your life afterwards.
This reminds me of that episode on Big Bang Theory where Howard goes to space and comes back and all he does is talk about space.
That's right. Oh my God, that is such a good analogy. Yeah, Howard Wolowitz goes to space when I was in space. Yeah, that is an amazing thing that happened, and he's a great hero for having done that in the show. But he didn't grieve for it, and so he forever walked into constantly. And
I think people also start getting a bit tired if you haven't dealt with your own grief, right?
Yes.
I mean, how much are they going to keep giving their energy in your direction to uphold your broken dreams?
Oh my God, yes, that's very true. So if we literally do not resist the various stages of grief, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. But the truth is, if we have a sensation, a tendency to believe that this is as good as it gets, then grief is all you're going to get, because eventually everything is going to end. But if we have the kind of live on hope and faith, rather than what only the eye can see. And we have a capacity to know that we are able to create that which we envision for ourselves. We will not be afraid to grieve, right? It takes a certain bravery to grieve. And I think part of growing up is in teaching the next generation and in learning the power of grief.
Yeah. All right. So I don't really have anything.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us and putting up with my incessant fanning. So thank you so much for joining Jharna and me in this talk about grief. Not exactly the most pleasant subject, but then the important things in life seldom are very pleasant. So I hope you're keeping safe, distancing, quarantining yourself, being responsible, for this too will pass. And yes, this is unprecedented times, and during these unprecedented times we're going to have unprecedented emotions. Maybe we should give it time to give ourselves permission to be porous for those feelings as well, and we'll come out of it stronger. Oh my God, look at how giant my hand is.
I think this is the time to just make the most of it and just do whatever you need to do at this point in terms of dealing with your emotions, right? Because
absolutely.
when, I mean, hopefully we don't have to go through something like this again, you know, what is happening right now. But when are we going to get the time like this?
Oh, never again. Yeah.
So, yeah, please make
Right.
use of it. Grieve. And I sound so happy when I say that.
No, but there are people, there are friends and who've lost jobs.
Yeah.
There are people whose lifestyle has been drastically reduced and irrevocably changed.
Yeah.
There are people who've lost loved ones through the disease. What do? You go through it, right? Don't let this dictate your destiny. Be the master of your fate and be the captain of your destiny. Seize it. And don't let something like grief stop you from being all that you can be. All right, so thank you so much for joining us. This is Edel and Jharna signing off from one more episode of Shred Your Halo. Join us next fortnight for a brand new topic that we will think up and we will come up. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe and click on that bell thingy so that you'll know every time we put up a video, which is once every fortnight, so you can join us. And please leave your thoughts as comments, questions, say a hi, and if you like this video, share it with all your friends, and we'll see you in another couple of weeks. Love you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.